So can one choose not to haul cheap freight? Over the last 3 months, as things have gotten harder and harder in the US, I receive hundreds of comments on just don't haul cheap freight. I don't think we should be hauling cheap freight. Say no to cheap freight, and many other comments on don't haul cheap freight. So can an owner operator actually choose not to haul cheap freight? So let's break this down into 3 parts. Number 1, we'll take an owner operator that is on a gross split commission. Number 2, we'll take an owner operator that has his own authorities. And number 3, we'll take an owner operator that runs on a rate per mile. So who am I and what in the world do I know about trucking? Well, I'm Ronen, VP of Operations here at ET Transport. I've watched and been a part of this growth from 10 power units to now literally over 100 power units in our fleet. We are a Canadian carrier here in Concord, Ontario. Now recently we have opened up a terminal also in Atlanta, Georgia, which is our first US terminal, allowing us to do US to US runs. So don't forget that this channel is all about trucking, and especially now in tough times, you need to be a part of this channel. Through this channel, through these comments, we can help each other through rough times. So let's talk about the first one, owner operator that has a split, 60, 70, 75% split, to where he gets to keep 60% of it, he gets to keep 70% of it, or he gets to keep 75% of his gross earnings, depending on the company that he chooses to work for. You know, with every single pay package, there's always differences. Some trucking companies will include the trailer within the 70-30 split. Some trucking companies will charge the owner operator everything and every on-road expense there is out there. So somebody who's doing 60, 70, or 75% split, can he choose not to haul cheap freight? So if a dispatcher calls him and says, hey, I got a load for you, and the owner operator says, sure, from where to where is it going? He says, you know, from Atlanta to Illinois. Let's say the load is paying $2,000. At a 70-30 split, the owner operator would be getting $1,400 and the company would be keeping $600 as their split is 70-30. If the dispatcher called and said $1,500, can an owner operator choose not to haul cheap freight? Well, in reality, he or she can choose not to haul cheap freight, but what else are the options? I mean, right now, I would say probably our industry average is about $1.75, $1.80, $1.85 per mile. Now, an owner-operator that's on a 70-30 split, you know, he or she needs to kind of understand what is their break-even point, how many on-road expenses they have, and can he or she continue to survive making only 70%. With the owner-operator split at 60-40 or 70-30, when times are good or when people are billing $4 or $5 a mile and making $4,000 or $5,000 on a 1,000-mile load, who cares what the split is? You're still profitable, you're making a ton of money. But as times get harder, the split becomes kind of unfair to the owner-operator because their profit margins are extremely thin, but the trucking company that's making the 30 or 40% split, that's keeping 30% of the profits, you know, just the gross margins went down, but the actual profits, I don't believe is going down. So can an owner-operator choose not to haul cheap freight when they're doing a split? They actually could, but what are the options for them? Now let's talk about the owner-operator with his or her own authorities. Can he or she choose not to haul cheap freight? Now, let's take a scenario where I am an owner-operator, I have my own authorities, and I just have one truck. I think that's the most common one. Some people have 2 trucks, some people have 3 trucks, but let's take the most common one, a guy that has 1 truck. Now, he is sitting, you know, at a truck stop and is looking at the load boards. There's a load that pops up, paying $1.65 per mile. Can he or she choose not to haul cheap freight? Yes, but what are the options? So the options are that he continue to wait and look for a load. The other option is to find a better load and a better route, or to find locally a much higher paying load per mile, or a longer route that pays a little bit less. But there's really not a lot of options because as the rates go down, the reason why they're also going down is because there's an influx of trucks looking for loads, and there are not enough loads for all these trucks. So these trucking companies are really fighting over loads. Now, the owner-operator, well, here is the good times for the owner-operators that get paid a rate per mile. So if I'm getting paid $1.75 and the company's paying for my insurance, my plates, my tolls, my bridges, my faxes, my every single on-road expense that you can think of, well, guess what? I really don't care if the times are good or if the times are bad. I'm getting paid X amount of dollars. Usually it's $1.70, $1.65 plus a fuel surcharge. But usually in these times, owner-operators that get paid per mile, they really don't care what's happening in the market because they're getting paid a rate per mile and everything is paid for by the company. So those guys are actually benefiting right now in a downfall economy, and you can hear and see the influx of phone calls. Like for example, in our Concord, Ontario location, In Canada, we only pay owner-operators a rate per mile, where in the US, it's not as common. Everybody wants that 25-75 split. So when we open our Atlanta, Georgia terminal, we will have that 75-25 split. But in Canada, it's a lot more common to pay people per mile. Now, I can assure you that right now, there's a huge influx of phone calls of owner-operators wanting to work at a rate per mile. They know they're making X amount of dollars per mile. They know that they're making this much money net after fuel, and they are good with that. So owner-operators rate per mile, that's where you need to be right now. Now, can I park my truck? Also, a lot of comments on parking your truck. Well, really, you need to consider a couple of things. So number one, is your truck fully paid off? And if it is fully paid off, then yeah, maybe you can park it and then get insurance just for theft and fire. I'm sure it'll cost you very minimal to be able to park that truck for 2-3 months. And who knows, maybe the situation is going to get better in 2 or 3 months. But owner-operators that have a lease payment, can they afford to park their truck? And it's absolutely not. They cannot afford to park their truck, because if you have a lease payment, then that's really going to set you back, because when your wheels aren't turning, you're not making any money. And if you're not making any money, then you won't be able to pay off that lease. Yes, you can defer, and I've heard of a lot of drivers in the US right now that are basically writing a letter to their finance company, please defer my payments for 3 months, for 4 months, for 5 months. The situation is really bad and we can no longer make the payments, so can you defer? And usually good finance companies, especially A lenders, even B lenders, they will defer your payments. And if you have a good broker out there, yes, they will help you out to defer your payments. So a person that is working on a 70-30 split or 75-25 split, can he or she decide to park their truck? Well, if my owner-operator came to me right now and wanted to park my truck, yes, I would need to unplate him. I would need to take off the insurance, and then he or she can decide to park their truck if the rates are so bad. But on the other side, then he or she needs to decide, depends what situation they're in. If their truck is fully paid off, and they're like, you know what, I might as well use this time instead of working just to, you know, take a couple of months off for myself. Yes, he or she can do that. Of course they can do that. But is it realistic? There are so many bills to pay, and it doesn't matter which household you're on. We are all living the American dream, and we all have monthly expenses that we pay for. So can you just decide to park your truck? Sure. I mean, if you planned for a rainy day, then maybe today is that rainy day that you might want to park your truck. Do I see that happening in the US? No, I think this is uncommon, and I don't think there are maybe 15-20% of owner-operators out there that probably have their trucks paid off and can afford to park their truck for 3-4 months at a time just to to wait around. So all these comments about park your truck and don't haul cheap freight, I don't think that that is possible, because if you are not hauling freight, even if it's cheap freight, if you're not hauling any freight and you just parked, how long will it take until you really start feeling it with your expenses? So fuel consumption is playing a huge role right now in the ability to not to haul cheap freight. So for example, a load that pays $2 per mile, a driver that's driving at 8.5 or 9 miles per gallon, there is a lot more profit left over for him or her than the same person that's hauling that freight, that $2,000 load with a 6.5 or 5.5 miles per gallon. Right? So if I'm driving a truck that's 9 miles per gallon and you're driving a truck that's 5.5 miles per gallon, you better believe that I have a lot more money left over at the end of the month than the person that's driving with a 5.5 miles per gallon. Now, round trip rates are very, very important. Brokers can call all the time and say, hey, I have a load for you. Hey, the load is paying $2 per mile. It's very important to calculate round trip rates, not just one way, because a lot of the times when a load going from Georgia to Florida, yeah, that could pay $2 a mile, but you ain't getting anything out of Florida. Or same thing in California right now. The times are tough to come out of California, but there's a lot of money going into California, where a load can pay literally $2.80 a mile going into California, but you'll be lucky if you get $1.10 coming out of California. So you really need to count that round trip rate. Another mistake that I see a lot of people making is they're not counting their deadhead. If you need to drive 300-400 miles, the loaded miles, yeah, they paid you $2 a mile on a 1,000-mile load. But if you had to drive 200 miles empty, well, now you did $2,000 divided by 1,200 miles, which is equal to, it's equal to $1.66 per mile. So really, really important is that when you're counting your round trip, you're also counting your deadhead miles. So when brokers call you and say, oh, I have a load paying $2 a mile, it's really $2 per mile on their loaded miles, and it doesn't take into account the deadhead empty miles. Hope you learned something from this video. I'm Ronen, R-O-N-E-N, and if you have any questions, ask them below, and if you have any comments, ask them below. So don't forget that this channel is all about trucking, and especially now in tough times, you need this channel. You need to be a part of this channel to be able to help each other. We actually need each other. Through this channel, through these comments, we can help each other through rough times. I'm Ronen, R-O-N-E-N, and I'll catch you in my next video.
Okay.